There's a moment in every life when the mirror stops being just a reflection and starts asking a question: is this the story you meant to be living? Not the polished highlight reel, not the version that keeps everyone else comfortable, but the honest, brave, still becoming you. Transformation doesn't arrive with fireworks. It begins quietly, the second you decide that staying the same is no longer an option. 6 months from now, your life can feel like a different chapter, one where you stop apologizing for wanting more and start showing up like you believe it's possible. Growth isn't about erasing who you were. It's about honoring every scar, every lesson, and every late-night doubt that taught you strength. It's about rewriting the narrative with intention, choosing courage over comfort, and realizing that consistency can be more powerful than perfection. This is not a promise of overnight magic. It's an invitation to commit to your habits, your healing, your discipline, and your dreams. 6 months is enough time to build momentum, to fall down and get back up wiser, to become unrecognizable in the best way. Tonight, we're not chasing a fantasy. We're designing a plan, and by the end of this journey, you won't just feel inspired, you'll be equipped to become the author of the life you've been waiting for. Decide who you're becoming before the world decides for you, because identity is the root system of every future you will ever grow. Long before habits change, long before results appear, a decision must be made in the quiet place where excuses can't survive. Scripture says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." And that truth isn't poetic, it's prophetic. Your life will eventually catch up to the image you carry of yourself. If you see yourself as defeated, you will rehearse defeat. If you see yourself as called, disciplined, and growing, your steps will begin to align with that calling, even on days when confidence feels distant. Becoming isn't about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about believing God when He tells you who you already are. Gideon was hiding when he was called a mighty warrior. David was overlooked when he was already anointed. Esther didn't feel brave when courage was demanded of her. Identity always precedes evidence. That's why deciding who you are becoming matters more than chasing outcomes. When storms hit, and they will, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your identity. This decision is daily and deeply practical. It shows up when no one is watching, when shortcuts look tempting, when old patterns knock like familiar ghosts. Romans says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, not by waiting for motivation, not by wishing harder, but by renewal, intentional, repeated, disciplined thought. You choose what voice gets the microphone in your head. Fear will speak in urgency. Doubt will sound reasonable. Faith often whispers, but it tells the truth. Real life doesn't change because of one emotional moment. It shifts because of alignment. When you decide you are someone who keeps promises, you start keeping small ones to yourself. When you decide you are someone who honors your body, your calendar changes. When you decide you are someone who finishes what they start, quitting becomes uncomfortable. Identity creates standards, and standards quietly shape destiny. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What you prioritize reveals who you believe you are becoming. Time, energy, attention, these are not neutral currencies. They vote every day for the person you're becoming 6 months from now. You don't need a perfect past to choose a powerful future. You need clarity, conviction, and the humility to start again when you fall. Deciding who you're becoming also means releasing who you've been clinging to out of familiarity. Abraham had to leave before he could inherit. Peter had to drop the nets before he could walk into purpose. Growth demands goodbye moments that feel uncomfortable but holy. Faith isn't passive, it's obedience in motion. So choose deliberately. Speak life over yourself even when your voice shakes. Write the vision not as fantasy but as agreement with God's direction. When your actions feel heavy, let identity carry the weight. You are not becoming by accident. You are becoming by decision, by belief, by alignment, and by walking forward even when the road feels unfinished. Discipline is the quiet vow you keep when motivation packs its bags and leaves without warning. Feelings are unreliable narrators. They promise energy and disappear at the first sign of resistance. Scripture never told us to feel our way into obedience. It told us to walk by faith, not by sight. Faith looks like showing up when the excitement fades, when progress feels invisible, when the work feels ordinary. That's where transformation actually happens, in the uncelebrated hours where consistency becomes worship. Motivation loves mountaintops, but discipline lives in the valley. Jesus fasted in the wilderness long before miracles followed him through the streets. Noah built an ark under clear skies, day after day, without applause or proof. Hebrews reminds us that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Discipline is that assurance in action. It doesn't wait to feel ready. It moves because obedience matters more than mood. Real life demands this kind of resolve. You will not always wake up inspired to pray, focused enough to plan, or energized enough to pursue growth. That's not failure. That's humanity. Discipline steps in and says, I do this because it aligns with who I am becoming, not because today feels easy. Proverbs teaches that the diligent lead themselves into abundance, not because they were gifted with constant passion, but because they learned how to steward their choices. Discipline is love in its most practical form. When God corrects, He does it as a father who wants fruit, not comfort. For whom the Lord loves, He disciplines, Scripture says, and that truth reframes the struggle. Structure isn't punishment, it's protection. Boundaries around your time, habits, and energy keep you from drifting back into cycles you prayed to escape. What you schedule reveals what you value, and what you repeat becomes who you trust yourself to be. In real terms, discipline looks small but sacred. It's opening the Word before checking the world. It's honoring commitments when excuses feel reasonable. It's choosing rest without quitting and effort without burnout. Paul said he disciplined his body like an athlete so he wouldn't run aimlessly. There is intention in discipline. It trains your focus, sharpens your endurance, and steadies your emotions when life tries to knock you off rhythm. Discipline lights the candle every morning. One depends on emotion, the other depends on decision. When temptation whispers shortcuts, discipline remembers the cost of delay. When fear suggests retreat, discipline responds with action. James tells us faith without works is dead, and discipline is faith moving its feet before feelings catch up. Over time, discipline rewires desire. What once felt heavy becomes familiar. What felt impossible becomes routine. You stop negotiating with resistance and start trusting your systems. This is how character forms, line by line, choice by choice, prayer by prayer. The harvest promised in Galatians comes to those who do not grow weary in doing good, not to those who only act when inspired. Build discipline first, and motivation will eventually follow, shaped by momentum instead of emotion. This is the strength that sustains growth when applause fades, when progress is slow, and when the promise still feels distant. Small choices are never small when they are repeated with intention, because heaven measures growth differently than we do. We chase breakthroughs, but God builds through patterns. Scripture says whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and that principle governs every transformed life. Daily habits are votes cast quietly, shaping who you become long before anyone notices the change. You don't wake up one day faithful, focused, or fulfilled. You practice your way there, one ordinary decision at a time. Compounding doesn't shout. It whispers like seeds planted beneath the soil. Habits work unseen before they ever break the surface. Jesus spoke in parables about sowing because growth obeys spiritual law. First the blade, then the ear, then the full grain. Skipping the process doesn't speed the harvest, it cancels it. When you choose prayer over panic, preparation over procrastination, alignment over impulse, you're building a rhythm that eventually carries you when emotions waver. Real life sanctification looks practical. It's setting your morning before the world sets it for you. It's deciding in advance how you'll respond to stress instead of reacting in the moment. Daniel didn't pray because it was convenient. He prayed because it was habitual. When the pressure came, the habit held him steady. That's the power of design. Your habits become a refuge when circumstances grow loud. Many people want change without structure, but Scripture shows us order precedes overflow. God gave Moses instructions down to the detail. Jesus had a routine of withdrawing to pray. Paul followed disciplined patterns to stay focused on the mission. Habit is not rigidity, it's reverence. It says, this matters enough to be protected by consistency. When your days have shape, your purpose has room to breathe. Compounding habits also teach patience. a fruit the soul resists but desperately needs. Galatians reminds us not to grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap if we do not give up. Proper time is rarely immediate. It's measured by faithfulness, not speed. The habit of showing up trains endurance, and endurance produces character that can sustain blessing when it arrives. In real terms, habits can redeem what once felt chaotic. 5 minutes of scripture daily becomes discernment over time. 10 minutes of planning becomes clarity over months. One intentional conversation becomes restored connection. You don't overhaul your life in a day, you align it daily. Grace meets you in effort, not perfection. God multiplies what you consistently place in His hands. Designing habits also requires honesty. You cannot build holy rhythms on unrealistic expectations. Jesus told us to count the cost before building. Sustainable habits respect your season while stretching your capacity. They are flexible without being fragile. When life disrupts your routine, you return without shame, because discipline anchored in grace doesn't collapse under interruption. Over time, these habits begin to carry you. What once required effort becomes instinct. You stop debating decisions that align with your calling. Peace grows familiar. Focus sharpens. The life you prayed for doesn't arrive suddenly. It reveals itself through accumulated obedience. This is how transformation stays rooted, how faith becomes lived, how growth continues even when the progress feels slow and the chapter still feels unfinished. Setbacks are not signs of abandonment. They are invitations to sharpen your wisdom. Every detour carries data. Every failure holds instruction. And Scripture reminds us that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. That doesn't mean all things feel good. It means nothing is wasted. What breaks you open can also build you deeper if you learn how to listen instead of retreat. The enemy wants you to interpret resistance as rejection, but God often uses opposition as refinement. Joseph was betrayed before he was entrusted. Moses fled before he led. Peter denied before he was restored. These moments weren't disqualifications. They were training grounds. Strategy is born when you ask better questions after the fall. Not why did this happen to me, but what is this teaching me about timing, preparation, and trust. Real growth requires emotional maturity, the kind that doesn't spiral at disappointment but studies it. Proverbs says wisdom cries aloud in the streets, and often it's loudest when plans collapse. When a door closes, you don't panic. You pause. You examine your patterns, your assumptions, your reactions. Strategy transforms pain into progress by extracting the lesson without carrying the shame. In everyday life, setbacks look like missed opportunities, delayed results, broken routines, or moments when your discipline slips. Erase doesn't excuse you for responsibility. It empowers you to re-engage with clarity. David didn't ignore his failure. He repented, recalibrated, and returned stronger in humility. A righteous person falls 7 times and rises again, not because they avoid mistakes, but because they refuse to stay down. Turning setbacks into strategy also requires surrender. Some losses are redirections disguised as endings. Paul planned routes that were blocked, only to discover new assignments he couldn't have imagined. When God closes paths, He isn't punishing, He's positioning. Strategy means aligning your plans with prayer, your effort with discernment, and your resilience with faith that God sees the whole map while you see the next step. Practically, strategy asks you to adjust without quitting. If a habit fails, you redesign it. If energy runs low, you rebuild margins. If progress slows, you examine systems instead of condemning yourself. Jesus told the disciples to cast their nets on the other side, not to abandon fishing altogether. Small adjustments guided by obedience can change outcomes dramatically. Setbacks also expose where identity was misplaced. When something shakes you deeply, it reveals what you were standing. Hebrews speaks of things that can be shaken so that what cannot be shaken remains. Strategy rebuilds on solid ground, truth, calling, and obedience, rather than approval, speed, or comparison. When your foundation is secure, disruption doesn't destroy you, it directs you. There is power in testimony that hasn't fully resolved yet. You don't need a perfect comeback to keep moving forward. You need humility to learn, courage to apply the lesson, and faith to believe that refinement is still progress. Strategy grows quieter as it gets stronger, rooted in discernment instead of reaction. When setbacks arrive, and they will, you don't fold the vision, you fortify it, you don't abandon the plan, you refine it. This is how resilience matures, how wisdom deepens, how faith becomes lived experience rather than theory, and how the journey continues with purpose still unfolding. Your energy like it's sacred ground, because scripture says where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, and your attention is one of the most valuable treasures you possess. Every day, the world competes for it relentlessly. Noise, comparison, urgency, distraction. Yet peace was never meant to be found in chaos. Jesus often withdrew from crowds, not because he lacked compassion, but because focus fuels purpose. If the Son of God needed solitude to stay aligned, so do you. Energy is not infinite, and faith does not require burnout. Even Elijah, mighty and obedient, collapsed from exhaustion after victory, and God did not rebuke him. He fed him, let him rest, and spoke gently to his soul. That moment reveals a truth we resist. Depletion clouds discernment. When you're drained, everything feels heavier, temptation feels louder, and calling feels distant. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's stewardship. Focus is a spiritual discipline. Scripture urges us to fix our eyes on what is unseen, not on what is temporary. Yet, modern life trains us to scatter our attention across endless inputs. What you consistently look at shapes what you long for. If your focus is fractured, your faith will feel fragile. Guarding your attention means choosing what enters your mind, what voices influence your spirit, and what narratives you allow to define your worth. In real life, this looks like boundaries that feel uncomfortable at first. Saying no when yes would please people but drain purpose. Stepping back from limiting exposure to compare, and that quietly poison contentment. Proverbs tells us to guard our hearts above all else, for everything we do flows from it. If your heart is overwhelmed, your decisions will follow. Energy also leaks through unresolved emotions. Forgiveness is not optional for freedom, it's essential. Carrying resentment costs more than releasing it. Jesus taught that reconciliation precedes offering gifts because internal conflict disrupts spiritual alignment. When bitterness lingers, focus scatters. When peace settles, clarity sharpens. Protecting your energy means confronting what you've avoided and trusting God with what you cannot control. Focus grows stronger when aligned with vision. Nehemiah rebuilt walls while opposition shouted distractions. Yet he answered, I am doing a great work and cannot come down. That sentence is a declaration for your life. Not every invitation deserves your response. Not every opinion deserves your emotional investment. Purpose demands selective engagement. When you know what you're building, you stop chasing every voice calling your name. Practically, guarding energy includes rest without guilt, silence without fear, and routines that anchor your day in truth. Jesus slept during storms. That wasn't apathy, it was trust. Rest restores clarity. Prayer recenters motive. Scripture realigns focus. These practices don't remove pressure. They train you to carry it without breaking. Focus also requires faith and timing. Rushing fractures energy. Waiting strengthens it. Isaiah promises renewed strength to those who wait on the Lord, not those who strive endlessly. Waiting doesn't mean passivity, it means alignment. When you protect your energy, you make room for God to lead instead of pushing ahead alone. As distractions multiply and demands increase, guarding your focus becomes an act of obedience. It keeps your spirit anchored, your purpose clear, and your strength available for what truly matters, allowing the journey to continue with depth, direction, and unwavering resolve. Stay long enough for the change to recognize you, because consistency is the language transformation understands best. Scripture never celebrates the sprinter who quits early. It honors the one who endures to the end. Jesus said the one who remains in him bears much fruit, not the one who visits occasionally, not the one who shows up when it feels easy. Remaining is active. It is choosing faithfulness when results lag behind obedience. Consistency is proof that you believe what you prayed. Anyone can start strong on inspiration, but covenant lives are built by those who keep showing up after the excitement fades. The Bible calls this steadfastness a word that carries weight. James says, the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. Finishing the work is where most people falter, not because they lack desire, but because they underestimate the power of staying. Life will test your commitment through monotony. Days will blur. Progress will feel slow. The vision that once felt electric may feel quiet. This is not failure. This is formation. Noah built for decades before rain validated obedience. Hannah prayed year after year before promise spoke back. God often hides breakthrough behind repetition so character can catch up with calling. Consistency is not perfection repeated. It is obedience returned to. You will miss days.
You will stumble.
You will question yourself. Grace is not permission to quit. It is the invitation to begin again without shame. A verb says the righteous fall and rise again. Rising again is consistency in motion. The enemy wants you to believe a misstep disqualifies you, but God builds testimony from persistence, not flawlessness. In real life, consistency looks ordinary. It's choosing the habit again today. It's opening the word even when it feels familiar. It's honoring commitments when no one applauds. Paul compared faith to a race, not because it's fast, but because it requires endurance. Athletes don't train based on mood. They train based on vision. In the same way, spiritual growth demands patterns that outlast emotion. Consistency reshapes identity. Over time, you stop negotiating with resistance. You stop needing validation to continue. What once required effort becomes instinct. This is how God strengthens trust by allowing you to see yourself follow through. When you keep showing up, confidence grows quietly, rooted not in hype, but in evidence of faithfulness. There is also protection in consistency. Erratic effort creates emotional whiplash. Steady obedience builds peace. Jesus told the parable of the wise builder who built on rock. Storms came for both houses, but only one stood. The difference wasn't intention, it was foundation. It was foundation. Consistent alignment with truth builds stability that withstands pressure. Consistency also honors timing. Galatians promises a harvest if we do not give up. Harvest is conditional, not random. Seeds planted faithfully respond to seasons you cannot control. When you quit early, you interrupt what was still growing underground. Waiting is not wasted when you are faithful in the waiting. This commitment is deeply spiritual. Every consistent choice declares trust in God's process. It says, I believe obedience matters even when I don't see the outcome yet. Over time, momentum replaces resistance. Faith matures into confidence. Discipline becomes delight. You begin to notice that change didn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It unfolded because you stayed. So keep going when it feels quiet. Keep choosing alignment when shortcuts call. Keep showing up when the story feels unfinished. Consistency is not just what you do, it's who you become as the journey continues, building a life strong enough to carry what God is still unfolding. You didn't arrive here by accident, and you won't leave unchanged unless you choose to. What you've heard is not just motivation for a moment, it's a blueprint for movement. 6 months is not a lifetime, but it is long enough to prove something to yourself, to prove that discipline can outlast doubt, that habits can outgrow fear, that faith can carry you through quiet seasons before visible reward. Transformation is not reserved for the fearless, it belongs to the faithful, the ones who decide, who stay, who adjust, who protect their focus, who rise again, and who keep walking even when the road feels unfinished. Remember this, God is not asking you to rush. He is asking you to remain. to trust the process even when progress whispers instead of shouts, to believe that obedience planted today will bear fruit tomorrow. You don't need a new life to start this journey. You need a renewed mind and a willing heart. What you consistently practice will eventually become. Who you are and who you are becoming will shape everything you touch. As you step forward from this moment, may you move with courage instead of hesitation, clarity instead of chaos, and faith instead of fear. May you honor the small beginnings, protect what matters most, and commit to the work even when it feels ordinary. The next 6 months are not something to survive, they are something to steward. Good luck as you walk boldly into this next chapter, trusting that every disciplined step is building a stronger foundation. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to believe that. Change is possible. May grace meet your effort, wisdom guide your choices, and perseverance carry you forward as the journey continues.